Hey guys, my name is Drayton Browne, and I did my thinking skills project on chess, also known as the Game of Kings.
Chess, the Game of Kings. First, I would like to share the history behind this great game. The game of chess originated in Persia and India around 6th century AD. People described the game as a military skilled game, but in actuality, it was used to describe political power. People then started to fall in love with the game and described it as a testament of human free will. Then in about 1000 AD, chess was taught in Europe and was a form of showing the social hierarchy. The main objective and pieces of chess. The main goal of chess is to end up checkmating your opponent's king. This means that the king can no longer move or be saved. In order to protect your king and attack your opponents, you must know your pieces. First piece would be the pawn. The pawn can only move forward one space and can only capture diagonally. The rook can move horizontal and vertical as many spaces. The bishop can also move as many spaces, but it can only move diagonally. The knight can move 3 spaces at a time and has to form an L shape. The queen, the most important piece, can move horizontal, vertical, and diagonal as many spaces. Lastly, the king can also move horizontal, vertical, and diagonal, but only one space at a time. The thinking skills involved with the game of chess. In chess, you always want to be ahead of your opponent. You want to be thinking of your next move, their next move, your upcoming move, and so on. You have to get into the mind of your opponent and try to think like them. What will they do next? You also have to be thinking of every outcome and conclusion to the game, thinking of 3 or 4 ways to put your opponent in checkmate. Let's try an example. As we can see here, it's telling us that it is white to move and mate in 2 moves. And this looks like this is a very easy game for white, because black only has a pawn. Even though it's white's move, let's see the king's options, because the pawn is useless and can't move at the moment. As we can see, the black king can't take the rook, because that would put himself in check by the white bishop, and he can't move to f5, g5, e6, and e7, because the rook is guarding those. Knowing this, let's look at the white's pieces. We don't want to move the king, and we don't want to move the bishop because then the rook would be open to capture. And we can't move the pawn, so all we have left is the queen. Let's try to reduce the black king's options from 3 to 1. We can easily move the queen to e8 and accomplish this, but now let's think ahead. If we force the black king to move to g7, we can now move our rook and capture the black pawn. Doing this also allows the white bishop to threaten the black king, because he is still on the same diagonal line. So now, if we think of the rook taking the pawn at h5, that also blocks the black king from going to h6, h7, and h8. And the queen at e8 will also block f8, g8, f7, and g6. And last, the bishop is threatening the black king at g7 and blocking f6. This scenario will force a checkmate. Let's see it in action. First, we move the queen to e8, forcing the black king to move to g7. Then, we move the rook to h5 to capture the black pawn and to threaten the black king with our bishop, forcing a checkmate on black. The skills learned in chess also used in real-world situations. Identifying multiple conclusions to problems is used almost every day in our lives. A big example of this skill being used would be an architect. If an architect had to make a multiple-story building, they need to know how big the elevator is, how the floors are planned out, how many floors there are, making sure that one floor doesn't interfere with another. An architect makes sure he identifies and forces a conclusion he likes. Thinking like the other person is a skill that most people need to learn. An example would be a social disagreement. In order to come up with a compromise, you have to put yourself in the other person's shoes and think about what they like, or think about what they want or their needs. Last, processing and interpreting different outcomes. A great example of this skill would be a doctor. The doctor has to make sure a patient doesn't have problems or complications during surgery. Well, what if the patient does have a problem? Then the doctor will have a solution right away because they knew what to anticipate.
Thank you for watching my thinking skills project. It was really fun to work on, and I hope you like it, Mr. Colosi. See you later.